On my immediate left is Non Evans, I'm sure many of you recognise. 87 caps for Wales. Wales' all-time leading point scorer, but not just a rugby player. Commonwealth Games judo silver medals, 2 of them, not just 1, and awarded the MBE in 2011 for services to sport. So that's Non Evans. Furthest right as I look, furthest left as you look is Paul Turner, former Newport and Wales outside half, the mercurial Paul Turner. I think that's how he was once described. Former coach of Gwent Dragons, Sale Sharks and Harlequins, currently the director of rugby at Amtil and runs a consultancy business, Paul Turner Rugby. Paul Turner. On my immediate right is Dr. Hugh Jones, former Chief Executive Officer of Sport Wales. Worked in the Sports Council for the last 30 years, it says. I know you retired within the last 9 months? July. Vice President of the Royal Male Voice Choir, which is an interesting one, and a Cardiff Blues season ticket holder. So he looks remarkably well considering. Well done, Hugh Jones. And furthest to my left, your right, is David Moffat, former Chief Executive Officer of the Welsh Rugby Union, former Chief Executive Officer of the New Zealand Rugby Football Union, former CEO of Sport England, architect of regional rugby in Wales, and is returning to seek election as Chairman of the Welsh Rugby Union. David Moffat. And just before we ask for the first question from the floor, I know David wanted to say a few words of thanks.
I do. I'd like to thank you all for coming and for showing your support, whether you support me or not, and you just want to be here to ask your questions. I'd just like to say that there is no question that you can't ask. There's no subject that is off limits. Both I and I'm sure the panel will do their best to answer those questions for you. I just might suggest that you give this lady to my right here a bit of a wide berth, because she got me in a headlock a minute ago. And I can tell you, I'm glad that I wasn't her opponent.
I'm his bodyguard.
I couldn't want for a better one, mind you. You know, it's also fantastic. I'd like to say thank you also to these guys here, and especially Nigel Walker for agreeing to chair this. Here's a guy who has done so much for Welsh sport in athletics and also in rugby, and as administrator up with the EIS at the moment, but also we first met each other when he was at the BBC and I was the chief executive, and we had many interesting arguments not only about rugby but also about television rights. So I'd just like you to put your hands together, please, if you wouldn't mind, for Nigel. That's pretty much all I wanted to say. You know, it has been very difficult. I've been here 4 months, and we are building some momentum. What we are here today, though, to do is to hear your questions and answer them. So I'll just hand over to Nigel. Thank you.
Okay. And the first question is from Colin James. I understand it's going to be something around central contracts. Colin, where's Colin?
The awarding for the WRU of a single central contract to the Welsh captain.
Okay. Central contracts. Hugh, I'm coming to you first of all. Specifically about Sam Warburton and his central contract, which is trailblazing as far as Welsh rugby is concerned, but about central contracts generally.
I think one of the difficulties, and I think this is, let me try and preface this before I answer the question properly. I think one of the difficulties is that people tend to focus on specific issues, whether it's central contracts or whether it's funding to clubs or whether it's, you know, the professional semi-pro game. And actually people don't sit around and say, what are we actually trying to do in Welsh rugby? What is our vision for Welsh rugby and its future development? And actually, that we actually fundamentally sign up to that vision and that strategy. We tend to get into situations where we immediately get into detail about things. And you can see that at the moment in terms of the debate that's going on between the regions and the Welsh Rugby Union. You know, where immediately the discussion is about a contract. people say, well, I don't like that clause, and we don't consider this. And I think that's a fundamental difficulty if people don't actually agree principles, first of all, and what role and responsibility the individuals actually have within that. I think when it comes to central contracts, I think initially I was a great supporter of central contracts as an issue of principle, having seen what went on in New Zealand and South Africa and Ireland and things. But I think in recent times, I think that is much more difficult to implement. Much more difficult. I think that time has now gone in terms of the central contracts is the answer. And I think a partial central contract of one, maybe two players is probably the worst possible situation because there isn't an agreement about actually who's doing what, whose role is what, and how are we funding all of this. And there is no doubt it will create conflict over the summer months. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think the regions will now be in a very difficult position where they've said we're actually not going to play centrally contracted players unless we've all agreed. That now puts Sam, I think, in a very, very difficult position. And I think it's disappointing that that was agreed in the first instance.
Thank you, Hugh. What's your view, Paul? Because you've operated in England and Wales. England, clubs hold sway. There seems to be peace there at the moment. Well, what's your view whether central contracts should be introduced in Wales?
Well, England exactly the same as Wales, really. I think England had all their problems about 13, 14 years ago, wasn't it, where they thrashed out a deal with, I think, the FDR at that time. And I think we all remember, I can certainly remember the time of the England players' strike or the threatened strike. And they sorted their peace deal out, and the clubs govern in English rugby now. They won't be on any central contracts. They missed the boat on that, and we did similarly. I agree. I think it was a sad day when I think Sam was the only centrally contracted guys. I think he got badly advised because there's been no agreement, and I think there's a lot of ground to be made up on that. Who is he going to play for next year, etc., really.
What would you feel, Non? How would you feel if you were the only player in the national squad who was centrally contracted? How would that make you feel?
Yes, obviously I'd be disappointed, but you've got to look at it from a player's point of view. Your playing career is very short. You've got to take the money while you have the chance. And if I was playing and if I was a man, I'd be down in Toulon sunning myself and earning as much money as I could. It is very, very difficult to make these decisions, especially when they didn't know what was happening with the Heineken Cup, the European Cup. They didn't know what was happening in Welsh Rugby. And I think that's one of the biggest issues at the moment in Welsh Rugby is the players that play for Wales don't play in Wales. And that's why there's less people going to watch the games. They want to go and watch their stars playing. I used to support Llanelli Scarlets as a youngster, and I still love going to watch, Ian Evans, etc. These guys who played for Wales playing week in, week out. And yes, it's tough for Sam that he's the only one. And unlucky, he should have taken some money and gone somewhere else. That's what I would have done. But, that's another debate. But something needs to be done about it. Because all our top players are leaving, and that's why I think the crowds are dwindling in Welsh Rugby.
Is there an easy solution, David?
There is a solution, in my view, and I've put a solution forward, which is a combined player contract, which is not used anywhere else in the world. Central contracts are in trouble wherever you look. Over in Ireland, they've only got 50% of the players there on central contracts, contrary to popular belief. They also have a situation just recently where they borrowed money from the bank to contract their top players, even though they've got massive taxation benefits for playing over there. South Africa now select the Springboks from France specifically. There's 56 South Africans playing in France. And so their central contracts haven't worked for them. And they now are, as I said, picking 5 or 6 actual Boks to play. The next one off the line will be Australia, because they're not a very wealthy union. They are about the 4th largest sport in Australia now, soccer having overtaken them. And they eventually will lose their players, their top current players, to particularly France and England. And then you've got the country where I established central contracts, which is New Zealand. And people have always said, well, New Zealand will never they'll always stay on central contracts. Well, that is not going to be the case. There is one thing and one thing alone at the moment that keeps All Blacks in New Zealand, and that's the fact that they have to play there to wear that jersey with the silver fern on, and it means so much to any Kiwi kid. They want to be an All Black. That's going to change eventually because they will not be able to compete with the money on offer in Europe, and they will eventually have to pick their players, their stars. I mean, you can see a situation. They are a bit smarter about it. They give sabbaticals to players like Richie McCaw and Dan Carter and the like, but that can't last for long. And so central contracts, I think, are coming to the end of their useful life. What I actually propose is a combined player contract, not dual contract. This is where you have one contract, 3 signatures, the union, the club, and I don't call them regions. You most likely all know that by now because they are, the region is a geographical area. The club is the team that actually plays. Their major role is to play in professional competitions, and the player, and of course the player, is actually the most important part of that signature. We'll then have a pool of money into which the union puts a whole lot, and then the clubs will put a whole lot of their money, which they earn from playing in their competitions. Then we will then sign to a combined player contract, 25 players per professional club. And that is about the only way that we're going to have half a chance of stopping players from going or even bringing them back. It's not reused anywhere else.
Just before I go back to Colin, is it unrealistic to expect Wales's best players, so a large proportion of the national team, to be playing in Wales? Is that unrealistic or is it achievable?
Well, it's unrealistic at the moment because the French have actually set a false market for the players. However, the false market is the market. And as Non said, if you were a player, you're going to take it because you've got a particularly low expectation of the number of years you can play as a professional player, especially the way they play the game these days. I mean, it is just brutal. And I certainly wouldn't want to be playing it at the top level or even at the lower levels. So yeah, no, it's going to be extremely difficult. But if we're going to, a small country like Wales is going to have half a chance, then you have to have the WRU and the Regional Rugby Wales, on behalf of those clubs, working in such close partnership that they're almost one. And I think that is, as Hugh alluded to, that's one of the biggest problems in Welsh Rugby at the moment, and which is why I came back.
Okay. Colin, what's your view? You asked the question. What's your view?
You shouldn't just have one player. It's either going to be a group of elite players that people identify, and we're going to pick from them players. If you've just got one player and he's a captain, well, I just feel then, even if his form is off, they're just still forced to play him. Well, that shouldn't be how the game's played. It should be our best 15 or 20 in the squad taking the field.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have a view on that before we move to our second question? Obviously not. Stunned them into silence. Okay, so that's one question off. Our second question comes from Greg Jones. And I've got on my card regional identity, which is interesting, given that David has said that Regional Rugby Wales exists, but that they're clubs, not regions. So Greg Jones, where's Greg Jones?
Thanks. How interesting to hear the panel sort of see how the regions would re-establish themselves as true representatives of the areas that they're supposed to be a region for.
Non, I'll come to you first. So, regional rugby in name, but not in deed. What do we need to do then to turn them into true regions so that they're generating interest and a vibrant playing staff across the region, not just in the league club?
Yes, that's what's changed, isn't it, over the years. And I mentioned when I was growing up, most of the Llanelli Scarlets players came from Llanelli, most of the Swansea players came from Swansea. You played for your local club, and that's changed. Lee Halfpenny's from Gorseinon, and he plays for Cardiff because they offered him most of the money. And I think if you play for your local club, that's where that feeling is. You're playing with people you grew up with, people from that area, and that has completely changed. And if you look at, I think, the bottom half of the Premiership at the moment, or the bottom 4 clubs, they all feed the Ospreys. and the turnover of players coming out of those clubs. Swansea went down, of course, yesterday, which is, you know, very, very sad day in Welsh Rugby as far as I'm concerned. My father was a big all-white supporter, and when I played rugby, it was that club spirit, the team spirit, and having that cohesion and playing with the same players week in, week out. And that's what you don't have now in these clubs in the Premiership, because they're losing players week in, week out. The regions can just pinch players and take them wherever they want for games here, there, everywhere. And that's why, you know, the Premiership is suffering and struggling. So how do you make a region feel like a region? I think the only one perhaps that has got a little bit of that is perhaps the Newport Gwent Dragons. Maybe it's because it's more Newport rather than having your Ebbw Vales, etc., Paul. But yeah, there's that feeling there, but perhaps because it is more Newport dominated than perhaps, you know, the other clubs which are fed from different clubs around.
Yeah, I think you know, not a lot has changed, to be honest. I think what has changed a lot for me is from when I grew up, when I was a kid, the Gwent Valley was full of mines and steelworks, and the main clubs, and you had to whisper this quietly, were Ebbw Vale and Newport. So throughout the valleys, whether you played for Pontypool or my club Newbridge, you're always sort of told by your dad you don't want to go down and play for them so-and-sos, you know, that's the first thing you were told. But you look over history, and some of those great sides, the Newport side that beat the All Blacks were probably, I'm not 100% certain on this, but it's probably 2/3 were all brought from the valleys, really. You know, your Brian Prices, your BJ, Brian Jones, Glenn Davidge, all those guys, I think, maybe wrong with Davidge, but they all came from communities around there. But that was the big club, you know, going even back to me as a youngster to go and play. I ended up disobeying my dad and going down the valley and playing for Newport. But they were always the teams that played the big national sides, whether it, you know, be the All Blacks or Springboks or Australia at that time, in South Africa. So not a lot has really changed, but, you know, nobody's kidding anyone around here. I think it is Llanelli. I think the Ospreys have actually tried their best and probably been the most successful regional side to become a region. I don't think that's the same that can be said about the others. They've tried, but it's very difficult. A lot worse in the Gwent Valley now than it used to be. It's really sad that you've only got to look at the main side in Wales at the moment, which is the Ospreys. In terms of success, that there are 3, maybe 4 sides in that region are all down the bottom of the Welsh Premiership, and they've developed a lot of good youngsters. On the other hand, in the Gwent Valley, I think a few of those clubs are probably more self-sufficient, and they're probably not. You take your Cross Keys, your Ebbw Vale have just got promoted. They're not that attached to the Dragons as those clubs are to the Ospreys. So there's a huge difference. I don't know the answer. You know, I've done it today. I've come down over the Bath Hill, and you can see in my time at the Dragons, it was always, I know what to sort out, I know how to sort it out, but as soon as you get to the bridge, there's that big black cloud appears. And it was no different this morning. I just chuckled to myself when I saw it. It was a big black cloud, and it becomes very murky, especially when you're trying to deal within your own region. I had huge ideas about, it's very difficult being employed for my 5-6 years at the Dragons. I had loads of ideas of bringing the region together, but you never really manage it.
And you look at Pontypridd, who are, you know, winning the Premiership year in, year out. Who are they feeding? Are they losing players to the regions? Not many. Well,
they've, in fairness to them, you know, they've sort of a few players have gone to Cardiff. 2 coaches have just gone to the Blues, and you know, there's a lot of spagging going on at times. But you know, I think you know, they're a proud club, and you know, they're very unlucky yesterday, by the way. But it sums up a lot of the problems we've got. You know, there's never a real answer, and the regions are doing I think they're trying to do the best they can. But I think the clubs need help. most of those clubs.
So, David, when you established the regions, you would have had a vision, a dream for what could be achieved over the next 5 or 10 years. So the clubs then became the second tier rather than the employers of professional players. 5 regions to begin with, and then 4 regions. What was the dream? What did you expect to happen?
Okay, I mean, it was quite clear that what we were formulating was a system where professional rugby in Wales could actually survive. Because when I got there was about 10 clubs that were in the Premiership at the time who thought they were all professional. At that time there was only 12 professional clubs in the whole of the Southern Hemisphere. It was obviously quite clear that that wasn't going to work here. So set about devising regional rugby with the club at the centre of it, but because of common usage, they became the region. They were never intended to be the region. The region is a geographical area. So let's take Ospreys as an example, and for the purpose of this exercise, call their region Australia, which involves all of that geographical region. Ospreys would be the professional club. And that's what I'm now talking about. The one thing, and I made mistakes, we all make mistakes, and I made mistakes for a variety of reasons. We had no money, we were being threatened with being sued, we had loyalty agreements at the time, and a whole lot of issues, but that doesn't escape the fact that some mistakes were made. One of the mistakes that I made was thinking, as they do in New Zealand, that the second tier teams, the Premiership, what would become the Premiership, which is comparable to the sides in the provincial sides in New Zealand, would be happy with their lot. And they weren't. And they weren't because there is this more embedded culture in UK sport of promotion and relegation. There was relegation, but there was no way of getting out of the Premiership. And I misunderstood that, and I accept that I made a mistake. I won't accept that I made all the mistakes that caused the Celtic Warriors to go under. Pontypridd at the time went through. They actually lost £500,000 of union money. They weren't able to keep their end up as a professional, part of a professional organisation. Leighton Samuel took it to the brewery. He was losing £1 million a year. He wanted out and we couldn't afford. Well, can I just tell you how bad it was at the time? You may remember a guy called Paul Sargent who ran the stadium and did a brilliant job, and he had guys like Rupert Moon working for him. And the money was so scarce that those guys painted the common areas or the public areas of the stadium themselves. We couldn't afford to get painters in. That's how bad it was. And people just need to remember that a little bit. Anyway, that's what happened, but I did misunderstand that. So in my manifesto, I seek to redress that by saying that like Australian sport, and particularly like American sport, there will be a way forward and a way of becoming a professional club. You could have 2 professional clubs in one region, for example. If we took Pontypridd as an example, if by 2020, which is when we would open the opportunity up, if they've got the stadium, the players, the money, the crowds and all that sort of thing, they could make application to become a professional club, just like North Wales can. But at the moment, everybody seems to think that it's going to be North Wales and North Wales and North Wales. Well, it might very well be, as it turns out, at the time, but they've got an opportunity. But they've came out very quickly and said that they were never going to support it, so that's fine. Other clubs may, if I get in. But there is an example of a mistake that I made, which I think I've now corrected. There is going to be an opportunity going forward. There's not an opportunity for Wales ever to have 12 professional teams. That is just not going to happen. But there might be an opportunity to have 5.
But isn't that a contradiction, given the first question, that Wales, just as most other nations, are struggling to compete against France and England in that order,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
because there isn't enough money to go around.
Right.
and yet we're saying we could establish a further professional team. That would seem to be a contradiction to me, or have I missed something?
Yes, you have.
It wouldn't be the first time if I have. An ex-rugby player, too many kicks in the head. So explain it to me then.
Yes, okay. There are currently 50 players playing outside of Wales, sort of professional rugby players. And that's more than the required number of players to actually to actually form another team. In addition to that, there are huge numbers of young players coming through who will be looking for somewhere to go. And I actually think that we started out with 5 teams and it was a struggle. 4 teams can be a struggle at times. There's only 5 in the whole of New Zealand. But if we all work together and if we get everything in the right order, and the stars will have to become aligned, there's no doubt about that, then I do believe that we could, by 2020, 2025, whenever it is, we could have another team. I mean, Scotland's talking about a 3rd team now. But I'm talking about actually giving teams an opportunity to prepare, so that you don't say to them, next year you're going to be in it. You give them an opportunity to plan for it.
Nigel, can I ask a question, David? Your knowledge on Australian rugby, if you can remember back, they weren't a major nation and only played the Lions on a sort of first game of the tour, wasn't it, before they went to New Zealand? That's back in the 60s, 70s. But there was only Queensland and New South Wales at that time. Since then, and you said earlier on that they're probably their 4th sport, since then they've developed 3 other teams. So my question really is, financially, how are they dealing with that?
Well, I mean, it's a struggle, but their view, and the 3 teams that they put in were the Brumbies, the Rebels and the Western Force, so they now cover most of Australia. But, you know, we've seen the ups and downs. The Western Force has been better this year. Still mainly Queensland and New South Wales, because you've got to remember in Australia it's a game played in private schools, essentially, and that's about it. But they have got their plans and they're working very closely, very methodically towards it. And that's exactly what I would like to see. I'd like to see method in all of what we do in Welsh Rugby, working together. If we don't work together, we can't do anything. And I've heard countless times that tribalism is an issue in Wales. I understand that, but tribalism was invented in Africa, and not in Wales. Right back when the first men walked on the earth, or first human beings. Sorry, first human being. There had to be a woman first, in my view. It is everywhere in the world, tribalism and parochialism. How to actually turn that into a positive for Wales is one thing that I struggle with and would like to find the answer to. It is possible for a small country to achieve incredible things as long as they're all working together.
So Hugh, can I ask you, is regional rugby flawed? That's the first question. That's the general tenet of the question. And specifically, given your experience with Sport Wales, what would the Welsh Government expect for the money that it puts in for the regional teams to provide in terms of participation opportunities and to get people on the ground playing the game?
I think David hit the nail on the head in his last couple of sentences, as far as I'm concerned, about sort of identity and parochialism. We are a very parochial nation, very parochial. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And until we actually agree what we actually mean by a club and by regions and whatever, and the people can literally sign up to that, then this will be keeping on going an ongoing issue. Because at the moment, what we've got are these regional teams trying to market themselves in areas which don't actually believe that it embraces them. And that's banging your head against a brick wall. Let me just read you something that I read the other day, where it says, "What is a club in any case? Not the buildings or the directors or the people who are paid to represent it. It's not the television contracts, get-out clauses, marketing departments or executive boxes. It's the noise, the passion, the feeling of belonging, the pride. It's a small boy clambering up a stadium steps for the very first time, gripping his father's hand, gawping at that hallowed stretch of turf beneath him, and without being able to do a thing about it, falling in love. And I think that's why we all came into this game. You know, that was the whole principle. Those are the words of Sir Bobby Robson. He was actually referring to football at the time. But the same is true in terms of rugby. And I think that's the key issue. Until we have a situation at the very lowest level of junior clubs where people don't try to hang on to their best players, so that we don't get situations as Paul was describing. You play for Newport, you play for Newbridge, you don't play for anybody else. You don't go to Newport, you stay with us, boy.
But I think all that changed when professional rugby came on board, because years ago people played for the love of the game. I never got paid to play. I played because I loved playing and I always worked. I remember Scott Quinnell saying one day when he went up north and came back, he said, I don't love rugby anymore, I play it now for the money. And that's when rugby changed.
Yeah. But I think for the vast majority of us, I think if clubs don't have that attitude and have a situation where we do sort of say to people, actually, the player is the most important, how do we actually get that player to play at the best possible level? And if that means that they've got to go somewhere else, then they've got to go somewhere else. And that has to operate all the way through the system. And until we get those feeder systems agreed, in terms of all the way up to the regional teams and whatever, then we won't have successful regions, because they won't be able to market themselves, because people fundamentally won't agree with it.
Okay. Just before I go back to Greg, one word answer, literally one word from each of the panel. Is the dispute between the regions and the union the biggest problem in the game today?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Greg?
Okay. That's what we've got to hear.
I'm tempted to ask you why, but I'm not going to. Greg?
Yeah,
what do you think of what you've heard?
Yeah, it sort of part answers the question. I think it's a tricky one, because it depends on what we've got the commercial drivers for the national side and for the regions. There's support for the grassroots, and like Noel mentioned, you know, the impact on Swansea yesterday. I'm an Ospreys supporter, same as God. So you know, it's a very, very difficult sort of balance. I'm not sure whether it's as much the balance with the WRU and the regions. That needs to be addressed, but I think it's also how the regions link in with the feeder clubs, and how they give the support to the feeder clubs, and how they may take some of the feeder clubs' best players and sit them on the bench, and then the feeder clubs get impacted as well.
Yeah.
What the answer is to that, I don't think it's
Well, that's for my next question. You can obviously see my card. So what is the answer to that then?
I wish I could. I'll hand
I'm
it
sure
back.
David will be scribbling it down if you give a coherent answer in 30 seconds, say.
But my answer to it?
Yes, please.
I think that WRU needs a total revamp.
Yeah.
I think the objectives of the regions need to be twofold: commercial and true regional. And there, I think, is where it'll lie.
And that's why I said no.
And that's why I've most likely answered the question too quickly when I said yes. And she's had my hand up my back. To actually...
I gave him my reason and he went, yeah, you're right.
No, but I mean, sorry, I don't want to labour this, but...
Okay, I'll give you 20 seconds,
okay.
David, please.
So, but what I allowed myself to drift into was this little place over here where that is a major issue, but it's not the biggest issue in Welsh Rugby at the moment. The biggest issue in Welsh Rugby at the moment is the grassroots.
Okay, right. On to Graham Hopkins, please. Where's Graham? Can I have your question, please?
Yeah, in view of the recent changes to the league structures issued by the WRU for the 2014-15 season, how sustainable does a panel think the 320 clubs are in Wales?
Wow. Well, we've got to go by midnight, so keep your answer short.
Say that again, I missed it.
Could you repeat the question? It was about...
Yep.
Well, I could repeat it, but it's much better if the gentleman repeats it, I'm sure.
Yeah, in view of the recent changes to the league structures issued by the WRU for 2014-15 season, how sustainable does a panel think the 320 clubs are in Wales? These are the local clubs that
I'm going to start
are
with
the
you,
grassroots.
David, on this one.
I think this is one of the biggest issues facing Welsh Rugby at the moment, because several things have been at play here. The changes to the leagues were announced in August, around about the 27th, I think. The WRU sent out a letter to all clubs setting out the rules for next year's competitions. And buried in about page 19 were the changes. So a lot of clubs didn't get to actually read those or understand them. And when it became evident that there was only going to be 3 divisions and you were going to have clubs from Division 7, who, let's face it, are people generally who turn up without training and have a few beers and just play for the sheer love of the game, are going to be playing against clubs from Division 3 who train quite hard twice a week in the gym, that sort of thing, that there's going to be huge mismatches. The referees weren't consulted about it, the clubs definitely weren't. So when they found out about it, they actually, the WRU got a little bit of a kicking when they went round the districts, and people told them they weren't happy. They said they'd go away and look at it. They didn't, and they've confirmed these league structures for next year, much to the annoyance of many clubs and the referees, because it could be quite dangerous as well, I think, when you're having those mismatches. So they need to be changed. But what the WRU said is that, well, we'll review them, then we might change them the following year. Well, that's no good, because you're just going through change after. There's already been changes to the league structure 3 out of the last 4 years. People need to. And if you go on the WRU website now, you can't find these changes to the leagues. So I'm not quite sure what they're hiding, but that was just.
What's driving the change? For those of us who are not fully au fait with it, what's driving the change? There must be a reason why.
Well, the only one that I can come up with is that the union has long believed that there should be fewer clubs. And this would be one way of achieving that, because I cannot see how some clubs are going to survive when they haven't got players. The players go along to play in these fixtures and they'll say, I'm not going to go and play, get beaten 100-0, so then they'll be fined and then they'll have points deducted from them and then they'll just close. And I just think that it is the single biggest issue facing the future of grassroots rugby at the moment, which needs to be addressed properly.
So what's the solution?
Have we got till midnight?
No, you've got about 2 minutes.
Okay. The solution, in my view, to a lot of this lies in devolving power away from the Kremlin. You know, they are a totalitarian organisation, and if you want to know what that means, I'll suggest you look it up, because it'll take me 2 minutes to explain it. But that is what they are. They want to control everything. My plan actually allows for the devolution of power out to what I call regional rugby boards, of which there'd be 5, including one in North Wales. And those regional rugby boards, amongst other things, will be able to control the competitions in their own region, so that they know what's best for their region. They know what's best for their clubs. They know that they want to keep as many clubs playing and as many players playing as possible. They've got a better chance of doing that when they control their own future. It doesn't need to be controlled by the centre.
But Alan, addressing this to Paul, isn't that what the RFU does, though? So is there too much meddling by Rugby Football Union and Welsh Rugby Union in trying to control rugby at all levels? And what do you think of the 5 regional rugby boards which David has mooted as perhaps an answer?
I agree with him, by the way. I think that's the first thing. I'm not too sure in England, like the club that I coach, we're in, we got a playoff next week to go into National 1, which will go in with a lot of ex-famous clubs, Coventry, Richmond, Rosslyn Park, and so on and so on. Don't forget, they went through this as well with their, I think we're going back to Cliff Brittle, Frank Cotton era of trying to get the county championship to be the be-all and end-all rather than the 12 clubs. It's a bigger place, England, and obviously financially better as well. So I think it's a little bit different in Wales. I think I agree. I think that the what David is calling RRW, the 5 regional boards, where they have governance via their executives to run their own game in those regions, and take away the WRU governance completely.
Well, that's radical.
Well, I think that's what he's saying.
Well, I know, but the regional rugby boards, and I've not seen this in your manifesto, have to report to somebody, otherwise you don't get the consistency. You always need consistency across a nation. So
and the
there has to be
Regional Rugby
consistency
Board
somewhere.
will be operating against a set of principles and core responsibilities set by the WRU.
Okay.
Okay, but there will be an opportunity for them to modify it, to take account of their own...
Based on local circumstances.
On local circumstances.
Yeah, okay.
Like North Wales is very different from Cardiff.
See, I'm not dull as I look. I can follow that. Okay, Hugh, what's your view on that?
I've always been a great advocate of decentralisation. Everything that we did at Sport Wales was based upon decentralisation. We had a regional structure out there in terms of how we operated. We established regional panels, regional committees, our community chest. Funding was set up on the basis of every single local authority. We'd give them the money and we'd say, you go make the decisions because you know your patch is best. So I'm a very big supporter in decentralisation. I think it's the only way that you can actually get and achieve success at the end of the day. But that has to be based on certain principles, and it has to be based on people actually agreeing what are we fundamentally trying to do. And that's what's missing here. And that's why we keep on looking at particular issues, whether it's league structures or funding, that people don't actually agree what the underlying principles are. So we focus upon individual bits of detail and we say, we don't like this, we don't like that, or whatever. And those are some of the fundamental things that have to change if we are going to be successful as a rugby nation at the end of the day, if we really are going to get up there with the Southern Hemisphere countries. Because if we don't, then we will continue to argue about individual bits of detail here and there, rather than giving people the responsibility to do things themselves and to hold them accountable at the end of the day. And that's a key issue, is holding people to account. Because if they don't, or they try and fudge things, or they break those principles or whatever, which is principles like, paying boot money and those things, and we agree that that shouldn't go on, and then we say, yeah, but that doesn't apply to us. And all sorts of other rules, then this won't be successful. People have to operate to principles. In the public sector, we've got 7 principles, the 7 principles of public life, and those should operate exactly the same in the world of rugby. They are no different. Selflessness, accountability, honesty, integrity, openness, objectivity, and leadership. And if everybody doesn't sign up to those principles and work on that basis, then all the rules in the world and all the contracts in the world are not going to work at the end of the day. And that's what we really need to get.
Can I just jump in there? You've just heard a guy with an immense amount of experience articulate what, not only that, but other stuff as well. So wouldn't it be useful to have somebody like him just heading up a review of the actual way in which you can implement regional rugby boards and how to go about it? And if I do get in, mate, I might come knocking on your door, because, we need people that think like this and are not thinking so tunnel-visioned. They've got a much wider perspective about how we can get the whole of Welsh Rugby to work together.
And sport in general. It works across every single sport.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, mate.
Okay. Graham, so what do you think of what you've heard? Regional rugby boards operating on the 7 basic principles. David's already offered you a job, even though he hasn't got the job yet, but that's the thing. And a more decentralised approach to rugby. So you can pick one or all of those things to come back on.
Well, in general, I think what Hugh said there now made a lot of sense. And obviously it takes somebody with his experience to try and sort these things out. I think that the people in the community rugby need to be spoken to as well, as with these divisions changing next year and Division 6 teams playing Division 3 teams, it's going to be a bad move for Welsh Rugby altogether in local rugby.
Yeah.
A lot of players are going to give up, I think, and clubs are going to struggle to find players if they're getting hammered every week.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Just before we go on to the 4th question, which I've got on my little note here, I'm told that I've got to ask for a couple of general questions. Is there anybody here who hasn't submitted a question, who what they've heard so far think, that's the question, the burning question I'd like to ask? Is there anybody in the audience who hasn't already submitted a question, who wants to ask a general question or two? Doesn't have to be a killer question, but something that has been raised or something that you've travelled. Surprise me. Could you just wait for the microphone so everybody can hear the question, please? And give me your name, and if you represent an organisation, that would be good too.
My name's Richard. Sorry.
Whoa. Microphone's working.
A bit loud. No one spoke about Pontypridd yesterday, and yeah, we weren't unlucky. There's sort of two questions arising from that. We've talked about the community game. How do the panel see the future of the Welsh Premiership? It's already been alluded to that the 4 teams from Australia, for the last 2 years, have occupied the last 4 positions in the Welsh Premiership. That can't be a good thing. So is there obviously something that's not working there, where it is working in the likes of Pontypridd, Carmarthen, Llandovery?
Yeah.
Is it a way where the region should be less involved with the Welsh Premiership or more involved? I mean, I see Pontypridd as a good example of bringing in experienced players with youngsters. And obviously we can see that in the success over the last 4 years. And yesterday in the British and Irish Cup, there were a number of youngsters playing alongside a lot of experienced players. Yeah. But under this thing, how do you see the future of the Premiership? Do you see it as simply a development league, or do you see it as something with its own independence?
Okay, good question. I want to take the question from the chap sitting right next to you, because he put his hand up as well, just so we can get through as many as possible. So I've got your question, Richard. I'll address that in a moment. Your name, sir?
My name is Martin.
Martin.
Okay. It's a general point, really. Paul Turner said, he quoted his father saying that you don't want to go down there and play for those guys, and so on. That point, the point about parochialism, David said that he made a mistake last time. He underestimated the attitudes of the clubs. I really want to know, how are you going to deal with that problem? Because for me, it goes right to the roots. Okay, every club, there's a big problem with the tall poppy syndrome in Wales. There's a big problem, for example, it probably manifests itself the best in the I'll never be a blue attitude, which is you've got one club against another club. You're going to have to deal with the situation where you're telling some people that those clubs are in effect better than you. And that attitude in Wales, I think, is a massive problem to overcome. How are you going to do that?
Okay. So, Paul, I'll come to you first on the second part, which is Martin's question, parochialism. How do we get around that?
I actually think years ago it actually worked, that did. But that was the club system. We're different now, since we've gone regional. And that was my point earlier. Perhaps I didn't make it correctly, but the Valleys at that time, when I grew up as a kid, was there were some great teams, and it didn't make any difference if you went and joined Newport or got a job in the steelworks at Ebervale and played for Ebervale. It was a great club scene. You know, the top 16, 17 unofficial championship at that time. Parochialism actually worked then. I don't think it works now. You know, I think that's what we're saying. Yeah.
So what's the solution then?
I think what we've been talking about, what David's mentioned, I think we've got to go to, we've got to have a change of governance. That's the first thing. I think that we've got to go to those 5, whatever you call them, regional rugby boards, and allow them to govern their own game, as Hugh said, with decentralisation.
Can I just...
just before you come in, David, can I just ask you, Non? Yeah. Richard's question about the community game, the Welsh Premiership, is it an end in itself, or is it a feeder to something? Because that's a really fundamental question. Is it there to feed the rest of the game, or is it there as an entity on its own?
Exactly.
And the approach to what you do with funding and everything else will be determined by the answer to that question. So what is it?
The last 2 seasons, I covered the Premiership for Scrum 5. So week in, week out, I'd go to the games, I'd do radio, or I would do commentary, second voice for Scrum 5. And I'd turn up to a Llanelli Cross Keys game, and there'd be myself, a few groundsmen, and a couple of crowd there. There'd be nobody watching the games. You got to Pontypridd, and I could name you most of the team, week in, week out. You had the core team, you had the continuity week in, week out. And they did well, and that's why they were successful. I'd go to a Swansea game, and I'd have to read up the team sheet and say, who's that, who's he, who's in, who's out, who's gone where. And I played for Clifton in Bristol for 9 seasons. Sorry to play across the border, but just to play a higher standard of rugby. And we had a core team, and we played together, and we were very successful. You look at the Welsh team now, you take 1 or 2 key players out of the Welsh team, and we lose games. When the whole team is there together, we win. And the Welsh Premiership, for me, those clubs that do well are the clubs that have got the core players, the continuity, the club structure, that ethos. And the clubs that are doing poorly are just there just to feed the regions like the Ospreys. And that's the difference between the clubs at the top and at the bottom.
And without wishing to repeat, but I'm going to do it anyway, what Hugh said, the Premiership, we have to understand what we're trying to do. And this is me paraphrasing what Hugh said. We have to understand what we're trying to do. And that's the question I'm going to ask you, David. Is the Premiership there to feed the regions, or is it there as an end in itself?
Well,
in your world,
yes.
Which is it?
In my world, it's actually there as a feeder to the professional rugby clubs. However, having said that, that's where I've admitted that I underestimated the desire of all Welsh rugby clubs to be promoted. They want something to strive for. So in my manifesto, I give them that. Not for every club, because I think we have to be realistic. We can't afford, at the moment 5 clubs, but in the future we can't afford 6 or 7 professional clubs. It's just never going to happen. And if we hadn't changed back from those days, the year before I arrived and we had regional rugby introduced, Wales had won 1 game in 7 against Italy, and that was it. In the period of time since regional rugby, Wales has had its most successful ever period on the field. Now, that's not due to me. It's not due to all of the other executives that are there now. It's due almost entirely to the systems that have been introduced, to the benefactors, largely, to the money that the WRU have put in. And it's allowed Wales to punch well above its weight. There was a recent letter from the WRU saying that it's amazing that Wales is always in the top 10. I took a bit of issue with that because Wales has always been in the top 10 for the last 130 years. It would be a major, major issue if we slipped out of the top 10. And I don't think that's going to happen. The aim has always got to be in the top 3. And that's so very difficult. But if we all work together, and if we have one common goal, then we can achieve that. That is always going to be difficult in Wales because, I mean, I say this as a little bit of humour, but when I look at Pontypridd as an example, I just say to myself, it's a good job that Nelson Mandela wasn't a Pontypridd supporter, because he would never have forgiven anybody for their past transgressions. And as we know, he's he's my greatest idol, Nelson Mandela. But if you know what I mean. I mean, so that's what you're up against. That's that sort of view that, mate, no matter how much you try and change things, we're always going to be against you, which is fine. I can take that. But we have to be able to actually work. It's what happens in New Zealand. They're not. I can tell you now, the provinces aren't all that happy about playing second fiddle, but they do it for one reason. That's that All Black jersey.
And if I can bring women's rugby up, with the seasons I played in Clifton, 14 out of the 15 players starting for Wales for 4 or 5 seasons all played in 4 English Premiership clubs. And those were the years that the Welsh women's rugby team was successful. We did well in the World Cup, we won the Triple Crown, we beat England. But the Welsh club structure did suffer. There was more and more clubs opening all over Wales. The talent got diluted, and Welsh women's club rugby was poor. Now most of the girls have come back to Wales. Yes, the clubs are doing okay. There's a regional structure, but the national side aren't doing as well. Yeah. So it's complete opposite to what the men. So are we here to have a brilliant Welsh team, which we have at the moment? The regions are doing okay. But the other clubs are suffering, so it's having the balance. And how would you work all that out? I wouldn't want your job, if you get it.
I was at the Arms Park, was it about a fortnight ago, when Cardiff played against Pontypridd. And at least 2/3 of the crowd were Pontypridd supporters. made an awful lot of noise there. It was a fantastic atmosphere. It was absolutely brilliant atmosphere. And I think, ironically, I think Pontypridd as a club, I think, are probably one of the best examples, I think, of what I'd like to see us achieve. But I think it is achieved by accident at the moment. You asked the question, Nigel, is the Premiership, should it be a feeder system or an end in itself? I think it has to be both. And I think the reason it has to be both is, and I think the reason the Pontypridd, I think, are a good example of this, is because you see these players coming through, playing for the Blues and things, people like Humberston and things. Now you've got the coaches and things coming through, the Chief and John. They are very good examples, but I think it happens by accident. And I think you've also got other players there who are the real, rock of Pontypridd, like Lockyer and like Di Flanagan and things, without which Pontypridd wouldn't be the club that it is, because you need those sorts of players there. They're not going to be the ones that, really go on to the very highest levels again in their careers, So I think those are the types of clubs that we want to see. But the parochialism that exists in Pontypridd actually makes it a successful club in some ways. But actually, it's because of the fact that those players go on and develop and things. I think the pity for me is that actually the region isn't much closer, that people can identify both with Pontypridd and the Blues, that people see it as it's got to be one or the other.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think that's the challenge that we've got to overcome.
Yeah. Okay. Richard and Martin, I hope that answers your question. Two very good questions, but we're going to move it on to question number 4 from the floor. Dan Alsobrook. Almost like a made-up surname, if I may say so, sir, but I'm sure it's your real surname.
It's definitely a real name. I'd like to ask, what's the panel's view on the recent comparison made between members of the Welsh Rugby Union Board and those of the English Rugby Football Union and the Scottish Rugby Football Union?
Right.
Remind us of a comparison, I don't know what.
Well, okay, I'll explain. In David's manifesto, he's made a comparison between the backgrounds of the board members of the Rugby Football Union, Scottish Rugby Union and the Welsh Rugby Union. And if you look at the backgrounds of the Rugby Football Union, there are people like consultant surgeons and solicitors, businessmen, millionaire businessmen. Scottish Rugby Union is similar, but the Welsh Rugby Union is completely different. Now, let me explain. And I am picking my words very carefully here, because we're treading a tightrope, and I do think we need to have respect for people who've put in a lot of time and effort into the game, but their professional backgrounds are different from the professional backgrounds of those in the Rugby Football Union and Scottish Rugby Union, and some of them have given 25 or 30 years service on the board. And what David is saying, and I'm paraphrasing because I'm trying to keep David out of trouble, what David is saying is that we need to change people at the top of the game more frequently than we have done in the past, and to look in different areas for their replacements. Okay, and I'm being very careful here because we do need to be respectful. And we're having this debate, remember, when the last 9 years have probably been the most successful 9 years at the top level of the game in terms of Grand Slams and in terms of championships, in terms of the number of people who've represented the British Lions from this great country of ours. So it's against that backdrop, but I think we're having this debate to say, could we have done more? Not that people have done terribly, but could they have done more? Because you have to make hay when the sun shines. And I'm just giving David a chance to think of an answer to this without getting me or him into trouble. Okay, Hugh, I'm going to come to Hugh. You've seen the comparison. What are your views?
Let me make a couple of general points. All sports have changed enormously over recent years, whether it's rugby, football, hockey, gymnastics, whatever. And in the vast majority of those sports, we are seeing significant changes in the governance of those sports. adopting the code that's mentioned in David's manifesto, the one that the Sport and Recreation Association have produced in terms of the governance of organisations. And that comes from, the Nolan principles in the public sector, the Cadbury principles in the commercial sector. It is nothing new. It's basically saying you should have the right levels of expertise to run your sport and your business. And I think that is actually quite fundamental. And hockey and gymnastics have made significant changes in recent years, and they've changed their boards and they now operate on a much more professionalised basis, bringing in people who've got marketing expertise, legal expertise, developmental expertise, coaching expertise, etc. The sports that haven't changed, ironically, are rugby, football, boxing. And those tend to be where people believe that there's something still in it for them as individuals. And that's where, if we don't move away from these principles and we don't adopt the issues of selflessness and honesty, accountability, integrity, openness, objectivity and leadership, that people will still continue to try and stay there within those rules, within those roles. So we have to get those principles over and to be able to say to people, actually, you've done a fantastic job, as Nigel was saying, over the years. You've done a heck of a lot of work, but now your time has come. And that's basically what I did when I finished the Sport Wales. I said, there's nothing more that I can do. It's time for somebody else to take my place, somebody else who's got different skills and expertise to actually move us on. We must become a lot less selflessness in terms of what we actually do. Now, I would have gone about it slightly differently. And I think it does irk some people. I think, if I can be perfectly frank with David, in terms of how that is presented. We tend to be a bit more reserved in, we don't like those sorts of things. I can't say that I'm mad keen on the sort of posting alongside me, but that's just my personal view and things. But the important issue is sports need to change, and the Welsh Rugby Union needs to change if we are going to be looking towards the next 5, 10, 15 years in terms of the types of vision, strategy and structures that we want to put in place that's going to continue to develop this great game of ours.
How are we going to do that?
I think there's only two ways that these things can be done. I think either organisations themselves decide that they need to change, which is what's happened with organisations like hockey and athletics and gymnastics and things recently, and that's the best way, because you get evolution and people move on. And there are certain sports that I've had to call in, and I certainly did do. I called in the chairs of certain sports, and we had a very frank discussion with those sports. And in the nicest possible way, I said, you have to stand down if you want to really see your sport develop, and if you want continued funding and significant increases in funding from Sport Wales. And those were difficult decisions for us to make. Now, that's very difficult to make where you've got professionalised sports, because we didn't have that financial control or impact with the Welsh Rugby Union or the FAW. So you can't quite do that. And as the sports aren't changing themselves, you do need some external influence. And I think credit to David for this. He's been the person that stuck his hand up and said, actually, I'm going to put my hand up, I'm going to stick my head above the parapet, I'm going to make myself unpopular with certain people, and I'm going to tell them, they need to go. And I think that's the only way that I can see change happening.
No.
I totally agree with Hugh. At the end of the day, it's a business now, isn't it? It's not club rugby as it was years ago. And I think in Wales, as a nation generally, we are narrow-minded, we are old-fashioned, we don't like change, we worry about upsetting people, what the neighbours think. And there was something in the paper recently about a woman being perhaps on the board of the Welsh Rugby Union, and they said, maybe not Evans, she's played for Wales. Well, no, just because I've played for Wales and I'm top try scorer and record holder, I'm...
Just thought you'd get that in. I would have said it, yeah. 64 tries.
Doesn't mean I'm the right person. There could be a top businesswoman out there, I'm good at that as well. There could be a top businesswoman out there who could sit on that board. and perhaps has no knowledge of rugby, but could have, you know, a real expertise on that board on how to structure Welsh Rugby and get these clubs and the regions and the Welsh national team working together. And you need the best people in those jobs. Just because, you know, you're the best rugby player and you've been there for years doesn't mean you're the best person for that job. And we've got to be ruthless as far as I'm concerned. Perhaps I'll get in trouble for saying this. And yes, David has stuck his neck out. And if we want to run a successful business, we need the best people running that board.
And Non's referring to the governance review led by High Court Judge Sir Robert Owen, and some of the recommendations have been leaked, and reducing the board to 10 members rather than the 18 which currently exist, and having different skill set and different competencies are some of the recommendations, so we are led to believe. And it will be debated, I am told, or at least a decision will be made in the annual general meeting in October. Now, I'm chair of this panel, so I'm not supposed to have a view. But the management of change, and as an MBA graduate, it's supposed to be what I'm good at. And I've done quite a bit over the last 15 or 20 years. And just a cautionary note, you tend not to go for big bang and throw everything up in the air and let it land unless things are going really badly, and things are not going really badly. So evolution tends to be what you go for and tends to be a long-term strategy, and all for change, but that change needs to be managed. And with that cautionary note, David.
Okay. One of the things that I am known for is telling it like I think it is. And I have to look myself in the mirror every morning and say, do I still respect you? The issue surrounding the board was one that I really feel very, very strongly about, because nobody was talking about it. By the way, I don't think that they've come out and said that that review that they've done actually says it goes down to 10 board members. That's my idea. Just like my idea to put a woman on the board, which they then conveniently followed some weeks later, like a lot of other things that I've been promoting, which they're now finding extra money for the clubs for, which they said they had none, and various things like that. But my option is part of an overall plan. The stuff that WRU comes out with is just ad hoc, looking for a headline. And you can't run a business like that. And I am critical of them. And I'm not going to sit here and say I'm not going to be critical, but I am. But I'm also critical of the board. And you may take issue with me for getting that information out there the way in which I did. I just was actually using all the information that's in the public domain, you know, about what they did, how old they were, and all that sort of stuff. And I also take Nigel's other point of view, that it's much better to take people with you. But when you've got an average amount of time on the board of 17 years, it's very difficult to see how they're going to be voting for Christmas, so they say. So I decided that I ought to I went with my decision. Primarily because when I got to the WRU, it was on the precipice. It was going into oblivion. There was £72 million in debt, and most of the board members didn't even know how much in debt the WRU was. They just lost £3.5 million. The union was technically insolvent. The Welsh side had won 1 game in 7, and they had 10 professional rugby clubs. So I looked at all this and I thought to myself, well, something's going to have to change pretty damn quick, or else we might as well close the doors. So I did that, and I've earned myself a reputation in Wales, I guess. A lot of people don't like me, but I can hold my head up high and I can say, well, I actually think that I left it in much better shape than when I got here, and a lot of that is still being seen, including the financial position. I think they paid down debt too fast, but that's another issue for another day. The 10 board members, there were 10 board members on that board that allowed the WRU to get into that position that are still there today. And I've tried ringing quite a few of them to just have a talk to them. I saved their reputations, and I saved their positions. Because if that union had gone over the cliff, none of that would have happened. And their answer is just to hang up the phone on me. So I thought, well, yeah, I'm going to allow myself, and perhaps I shouldn't, Nigel, I mean, the MBA, I never went to university, so I'm going to actually accept that you know a lot more about this stuff than I do.
Neither did I, I'm just bluffing.
But you know what I'm saying? I mean, I thought it was time that people remember, because I'm always battling history. I'm always being told by people, you are the person, me, the single person, you are the single person that destroyed Welsh rugby. And as Nigel quite rightly pointed out, things aren't that bad. And I say, well, they're not that bad because of the foundations that we put in place in the years 2003 to 2005. By the time I left, Welsh Rugby had announced a £6.5 million profit. That is a £10 million turnaround in 3 years. Now, if you are a company that's done that, as chief executive, they're actually thinking you've done a good job. So that's the reason behind that. I fully accept that, that plus also old Chickering over here. I mean, that's us having a bit of fun, and it's born out of total frustration that we should be today debating David Pickering, because I've asked him so many times to actually do the debate, not even the courtesy of a reply. I was responsible for him getting the chief, sorry, I'm going to bang on here, just this last thing. I was responsible for getting him the job of the chairman. Why? Because Glanmore was the chairman, and I quickly, and nobody will ever take away from Glanmore the fact that he had that stadium built, and I think he's always to be applauded for that. But he used to resign every 5 minutes, say, oh, I can't do this, and I can't go on, I've had too much. And I think he used to do it because he wanted people to talk him out of it. Say, Glenn, mate, you can't go, you're too important to Welsh Rugby. So I said, he did it to me twice, I did the same thing, no, you can't go. And I said to myself, if he does it again, I'm going to accept it. And it happened, actually, up in Scotland, in the hotel after a game against Scotland. And I said, Glenn, you're right. I think it's most likely time for you to go. And then I went and told all the board, so he couldn't change his mind. And the only guy that was there that could take over as chairman was David Pickering. So he had a shoehorn into that position. Right up until the minute that Glanmore was actually stood down at a board meeting, David Pickering was trying to talk him out of it. And he didn't. And David Pickering became the chairman. And yet he will not pick up the telephone to me. He will not answer my texts, any of those messages. He wouldn't come today to debate me. So, one gets a little bit concerned as to why somebody would want to treat a genuine contender for a position on the board of the WRU like that. I'll leave it to others to actually make up their mind, but that might be the background.
Okay. Dan, what do you think of what you've heard?
I tend to agree mostly with Non. The fact that the WRU is a multi-million pound turnover business now, so it needs a board of directors who will hold the executive to account. At the moment, that's not happening because we don't have proper, experienced people who have run successful businesses on the board of the WRU. Until we have, then the executive is just going to carry on being the tail that is wagging the dog.
Yeah. And what about the pace of change?
Well, I mean, you just have to look at the tenure of some of these people on the board. 25 years, I think one of them's been there. I think the pace of change has been pretty slow so far. It might be time to speed it up somewhat.
Yeah. I wasn't suggesting 25 years as the model for everybody. I just thought whether you felt it should happen overnight or whether it should be more of a phased approach to the change. I think most people agree a change is required, but it's over what time period?
Well, I think over and above what's happening right now, in some point in the future, the WRU is going to have to go to its funders, i.e. the banks, sponsors, whoever, to ask for money to do things. Might be build a new stadium, make improvements to the stadium, fill in Glanmore's gap, something like that. And a bank in this climate now is going to look at the WRU and say, is this a fit organisation for us to be lending money to or not? And are we going to be looking at that situation in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? it depends. But if we're not, changing the composition of the board in that timescale, then Barclays or whoever could turn around and say, sorry, you can't have the money.
Yeah, okay. And then that is a good point, but and just before you come in, if I were a member of the WRU board, and clearly I'm not, if I would go into the Barclays for additional funding, I would say, look how we've reduced the debt over the last 3 or 4 years. I think we have to be even-handed with this, and that it is going in the right direction. But that's not me making a political point, it's just if I were going...
Yes, it is.
No, if I were going cap in hand, that's what I would be saying, and I think if they were here, that's what they would be saying. Hugh?
Just a quick point. Firstly, there's the issue of structure, and why hasn't the structure changed? I think we've covered that. But the other thing we've got to remember is, in terms of individuals, they actually get voted in. It's the clubs that vote them in. So we shouldn't complain about those individuals because they've been voted in by people over and over.
Yeah, absolutely. If you ask as nicely as that, certainly.
Just you want to wait for the mic to come around? Here he comes. This is Mike with the mic.
He's running.
Hi. It was just a point about building on the pillars and the businesses, because I read the same thing around what Sir Robert Owen says. And then there was an assumption that we would only have one woman on the board.
Yeah,
but if we've got 2 non-executives, there is no reason why those aren't 2 women. And the one woman on the board is representing women in rugby. Because our women in rugby are treated, in my opinion, appallingly, that they have to play in Aberafan and not at the National Stadium, either after the game or whatever. But that's one point. Building on the pillars, we are a very public body, and some of the points that I've raised, the WRU as an entity, looking at the grassroots levels, can get involved in some of our strategic policies. And some of the strategic contracts that we have that pay an enormous amount of money for them to deliver a service at a grassroots level that fetches a completely different look into the game. And if I give you an example without monopolising this, tomorrow there's an announcement of one of 2 providers who've won 13.8 million to deliver community work placement for people who have to work for their benefits. We've got 300 clubs. Those clubs can provide any amount of work experience in any village across our 22 counties. There isn't any reason that the WRU, at a community level, I wouldn't let them do it now, but set up a community company that's called your WRU community. And at a grassroots level, they actually be generating income for that. And that's only one strategic aim. That's around unemployment and skills. We've got 128 million quid we spend on skills. The community can be delivering that. A big part of it is about engagement. We've got 27,000 kids who are not engaged. The community rugby can be paid to engage them. You've mentioned finances so many times. It seems it all comes down to finance. And yeah, we've got 5 or 6 key strands of multi-million-pound contracts. So I think what you need to do with widening your board is to look at community development as well as business. So it isn't just about someone who's made a fortune for themselves. It's the social entrepreneurs who actually want to give it all back. So I would be classed as a social entrepreneur. So I don't particularly make money for me, but I make contracts that generate money.
So what was your name again?
Lynn.
Lynn what?
Lundregan.
How do you spell it? Lynn Regan?
Lund. L-U-N-D.
L-U-N-D.
And then R-E-G-A-N.
Lundregan. Lundregan.
Lynn
If somebody else has got a job, I can't wait to give a good answer so I get a job as well.
Oh, we've been tweeting, haven't we? Yeah.
I think that's the advantage of things like decentralisation, is that you get people who've got some great ideas that just do it. They don't have to go and ask somebody else, well, can I do it, or why don't you do this, or whatever. They just get on with it. And then other people see, hey, that's a good idea, why don't we do that?
It was to add, foster an entrepreneurial culture, because we've got all the pillars, but our 22 local authorities are so risk-averse. Gee whiz. We need to put that in. And if you look at Humberston yesterday, what were we? 3 minutes left at the end, 22 up, and he just said, it didn't matter that he hit it or he didn't, the fact he had the confidence to do it was unbelievable. And that's what the crowd wanted.
Gosh, she's good.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah.
She's good.
I'm already married and I want to marry you, so that's how effective that has been.
Oh dear.
Okay. we're going to move on. We're going to move on. Yes, okay. Can I ask Rodri Hewish for his question, please?
How realistic are the chances of David Moffat succeeding the elusive David Pickering as WRU chairman?
Okay. I'll come to you last for obvious reasons, David. Cool.
I got to say, I look from afar. You know, obviously, I live in London, but as I said earlier on, you can usually sort of see things happening a lot better from afar. And I got to say, it was pretty turbulent the time before Christmas, where every time I think everybody was getting down about, you know, and what we're talking here is about the RRW battle with the WRU and the chief exec. Without this guy turning up in this country, he's travelled, and I've never met David until today, by the way. I've spoken to him on the phone, but I've never ever met him till today. I'd gone into England when he took over with the WRU, and then when he'd gone, I took over at the Dragons in 2005. So I've never met him till today. But without this guy turning up here, there was no debate. We can all remember just before Christmas when Lewis came on with our staged interview and threatened the regions. You know, it was a pretty poor interview for me. You know, so they were desperate times, and we can't forget that. But without him turning up and creating this debate, then I think everybody was pretty too much afraid to say anything. So, you know, he's got my support in what he's trying to do. Whether, you know, we get there, all these questions that we're asking at the moment, and they're all real good sort of views, but there's still a lot of work to do.
Hugh, I know you will have studied the Constitution and what it takes for somebody, whether an insider or an outsider, to move through the ranks, and you've already made the point about those people who've perhaps been on the WRU board for 28 years. They've been voted in legitimately as part of the Constitution by those clubs. What's your view, specifically, on David's chances?
Okay. I think the first point to make is I know Roger, David, Dennis Gethin pretty well. And I am disappointed that nobody has actually turned up here today, because I think it is really important that we have these debates. You know, if Welsh Rugby is going to improve and to develop. So I am really disappointed, and that's why I was quite happy to come along here today to give some views. But I would have preferred one of them to have been here rather than me to have been here. I think it's great that David's, as I said earlier, you know, put his head above the parapet. I think he's got an enormous task, you know, just in terms of numbers, whether it's to get the 32 clubs to sign up, or whether it's to get a district to vote him on. You know, those are constitutional issues that he's going to have to overcome, and I wish him luck with that. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the clubs. You know, if you want to see something different, if you want to see change, if you want to see, you know, the WRU being a very different organisation in 3, 5, 10 years' time, then, you know, you're going to have to vote for change. You know, there's no point sort of, you know, whinging and moaning about the Welsh Rugby Union and sticking, you know, with where we are at the moment, because, you know, we all know what's going to happen.
Okay. And Norm? I don't know whether you've heard the question. I don't know whether you went just before or just after the question. The question was, what are David's chances of being elected? You're aware of the Constitution and what it will require. What's your view?
Well, I think something needs to happen, and David's the only one who's stuck his neck out, as he said, and, you know, something needs to change, and I think everybody's here today because they're of that opinion. I think we've only touched on the surface of the changes that are needed. We haven't talked about grassroots rugby, we haven't talked about the state of the pitches, we haven't talked about anything. You know, and I've read the manifesto, and it's 47 pages?
28.
Oh, 28.
28.
I printer ran out of paper. But you know, and yes, it's disappointing there isn't anybody here today, but I think something needs to happen, and David's the only one who's here. So if it happens, it happens, but all I know is something needs to happen.
Okay. And David, how optimistic are you? I know you're a glass half full man rather than half empty. and I know you're a little bit of a bruiser and you don't mind a fight, but how optimistic are you? And what leads that optimism if you are optimistic?
I've travelled the length and breadth of the country in the last 4 months. That's how long I've been here. I originally came because I was so annoyed with the fact that the WRU and the regions couldn't get their act together to work a way forward in partnership, in a harmonious partnership. But when I got here, I realised there was an awful lot more that needed to be done. So I went around, not myself, there's a backstory here with the 4 people that have come out of the woodwork, plus all the others, to help me. They've been extraordinary. But I figured that, you know, I would apply. I said I was going to make application to become a board member. And I'm a legitimate candidate to become a member of the board. But given the WRU's intransigence in not even recognising that I am a legitimate contender, I decided that I would see if we could call an EGM and ask them a series of questions and then put to the clubs, you know, whether they wanted to keep, because the clubs, as Hugh says, the clubs are the only ones that can make change. They're the power. WRU doesn't have any power other than the power that's vested in them for as long as they do a good job by the clubs. So the way for me to do that is to actually get an EGM called, and in the next couple of days there will be a pro forma go out which will actually list the 9 things that I believe that the WRU should be answering and brought to account on. And if at the end of that they haven't been able to convince the clubs of their answers, then we will call for a vote of no confidence in the chairman and the entire board. That'll be an opportunity then to change the entire board, but each of the districts would have to come forward with a replacement board member, and then there would be an interim board of 9, of a maximum of 10, and I'd offer myself up for the 10th position. It is a shame that it's come to this, but I think there are so many issues that need to be addressed and need to be debated in front of all the clubs so they can make up their mind. And if in the majority of clubs, which is 161, to be perfectly honest with you, I'd rather get no votes or a huge number of votes, because I don't think you need 161, then it's, you know, you've still got this issue. You know, I think if the vote is no, I'll go back to New Zealand and look after the sheep. But if not in that way, no. But if I win on behalf of the clubs, then there will be a massive change. And really, there's 2 choices now. You can leave things as they are, under the way in which this WRU wants to run the game, or you can adopt a different one. A new board would obviously start looking at my manifesto, and it might not actually adopt everything that's in there, but the fundamental is that everybody would know that that's going to be the basis of going forward, including a smaller board, including an independent chairman, including independent directors, including women on the board, whether it be 1 or 2 or 3 or even half of them. I mean, women actually are over 50% of the population. Without women in rugby, I'm not sure how many rugby clubs have survived, to be perfectly honest with you. You know, they do such an enormous job. The club I was at yesterday, it was quite amusing actually. The club I was at yesterday had just formed a women's committee, and they were, I was sitting there, and I'm a great observer of things going on. Anyway, this lady who's in the women's committee was going around selling the raffle tickets. And I thought, oh, that, you know, my brain said, oh. But then the guy raffle ticket seller came around, and the ladies' committee had already sold their raffle tickets, which were different from the men's raffle tickets. So the men didn't sell many at all. And there was this huge argument going on about, you know, you shouldn't have sold your raffle tickets before we sold ours. But it just showed to me that you've got now a group of women that are in that club who are so passionate about raising money for the club. So, that's a little bit of an explanation of why I think I can win. I think I can win because I'm in the race. And if you're not in the race, you have got no chance of actually winning anything. I don't give in. Most of my life, I've been underestimated. And I'm happy with that, because then I can come in under the radar screen. So, we'll see.
Can I just ask a couple of supplementaries? And we're running out of time. We've got 5 minutes left, and I want to go to one more question. But I just want to ask you, 18 board members at the moment,
yes,
including Roger as the Chief Executive Officer sits on there.
Yeah.
Are you saying that none of those board members are worth saving, and that it's having collateral damage of all 17, exclude Roger, all 17, is a price worth paying? Because I just want to understand what your view is on that.
No, I'm not. I'm saying that in order to get massive change, you need to actually go through this process that I'm suggesting. There would be nothing to stop the districts at that time nominating some of the existing board members.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, that would be the case.
Okay. Just before we go for our final question, Rodri, what do you feel on what you've heard?
Well, I mean, I think it's obvious that the change needs to happen, and I thank David for coming back to generate kind of debate. I think that it needs to be mentioned the culpability of the Welsh media with not questioning the current kind of WRU strategy or lack thereof. It seems incredibly reactive rather than proactive. There doesn't seem to be any direction, and the press seems to be complicit in just letting the WRU do whatever it wants. So I think that the fact that nobody from the WRU decided to come along today is terrible, because at the end of the day there doesn't seem to be any desire to let us know what they actually plan for the game, other than just to control everything, let the regions wither and die, and then replace it with, I don't know, something else.
Okay, I think we need to be careful with who has accountability and responsibility for things. First of all, it's the board's responsibility to keep the executive in check and to look at their strategies and say, I don't think it's the media's job. And if there is any impropriety or things going badly wrong, I think you'd expect the media to jump on it. And over time, over the last 10 or 12 years, they have jumped on it. And I just want to shut that.
No, they haven't. No.
They haven't. I can see that was a really popular statement. And we don't have time, not because I'm running away from the argument, but I'll gladly have the conversation with people outside. When my time as head of sport at BBC Wales, where I was worked very closely with the head of news and current affairs, there were many investigations and many stories about the WRU, many of which David came to see me in my office, so I know it to be true. But I'll have that conversation later. We're running out of time, and that's the reason I'm shutting it down. I just want one final question from Amanda Roderick, please. Who's Amanda? Where is Amanda? Amanda,
here.
the front.
Up here, please, mate. You got a response, didn't you?
I did, yes. I'm about as popular as I was when I was playing. Thank you. Amanda.
Right, getting away from the controversial issues then. Assuming Warren Gatland stays on until 2019, who does the panel predict will become the next Welsh coach? I'm excluding Mr Turner from this.
Is that literally or metaphorically?
Well, actually, I'm going to Mr Turner first.
It has been a major problem, you know, even when I was down here, really. I can remember Lynn, when Lynn was at the Ospreys, myself, David Young and Phil Davis at the Scarlets, going to meet Roger and actually put in a couple of questions to him about the future of current incumbent Welsh coaches, head coaches, director of rugby, call them what you like. What happens to us when we're sacked? Because eventually you do. There was no plan put in place to use our experience after that. Gareth Jenkins was a prime example as well. You know, okay, we lost to Fiji in the World Cup, and that was desperate times for us. But the way he was sacked was just disgraceful, really. And there was nowhere for him to go after that. Obviously, he's gone back to his home and works for the Scarlets now. But it was a main problem for me. There isn't a future, really, after you've got to that level for your experience to be used within the Welsh game. you know, the fact that we've got a New Zealand coach who's been really successful. Where are the Welsh coaches out there who's going to take over from this guy, or could have been taken over from this guy, yet he's not been given another lengthy contract?
Smile. Good. No. Next Wales coach.
Well, Robert Howley was interim coach, wasn't he? So could have been taken on. Seemed to do quite a good job. Didn't have a very good autumn international, but then did well in the Six Nations while Warren Gatland was busy with the Lions. So he's there or thereabouts. But who knows? Perhaps they'll find another New Zealander.
Okay. And would that be a problem? Not because
I think
and sitting on the end, but would that be a problem if it were a New Zealander? Is it being successful more important than having a Welsh head coach?
When I played, it was the coach, it was the person. It doesn't matter where they came from. Most of ours were Welsh, but I think when you get a foreign coach in, you get different ideas, and when you get a new coach, it's fresh ideas as well, and that changes a team. So perhaps, yes, as a narrow-minded, old-fashioned nation, it'd be lovely to have a Welsh coach, but I don't think that's the issue really. For me, it's the best man for the job.
I think it should become part of our progression plan that we should be working down the line.
Coaches need
Definitely.
Okay.
I think it's great being able to answer these sorts of questions now, because I couldn't have answered it last year when I was Chief Exec of Sport Wales. I think the first thing that I'll say is I was actually surprised that Warren Gatland got a contract up to 2019. It's a heck of a long time for somebody in professional sport. And I think when you have a look at his record, I think he is currently the 6th or 7th most successful of all Welsh coaches based on win-lose ratio. But what he's won, of course, is a couple of Grand Slams and things recently, championships. And I think what we need is that debate and that discussion about actually what constitutes success for Welsh rugby. Is it winning Grand Slams, or is it success in the Rugby World Cup? Is it getting to the semi-finals, the final, winning the Rugby World Cup? And is that how we're actually going to judge our coaches and think in the future? And until we actually know how we can actually judge people, then we make decisions on, well, we like them or we don't like them or whatever, rather than on specific performance criteria. My guess would be that, given the absence of all of that, I agree with Noel. I suspect it'll probably be Rob Howley. But whether he's the right coach or not is another question.
Okay.
I've got to answer this question.
Oh, you're not?
I am.
Oh, right. I was going to say, what are you here for if it's not to answer questions? So,
as the person
next Wales coach.
As a person that was largely responsible for Warren Gatland coming to Wales, I mean, there's a front page on the Western Mail where they used a quote from me suggesting that they should get on a plane and go and get him. I've been a little bit disappointed because he's only got a win-loss record of 50%. What's important about that isn't so much the win-loss record, because it's the fact that he's only won 1 of 24 games against Southern Hemisphere teams. Now, here's the issue. If he had won 1 more of those games, or if they hadn't have played the last Autumn International before they seeded for the 2015 World Cup, Wales would not have been in the pool of death. Now, here's a situation where Wales has got to get out of that pool of death. They've got just to make the quarterfinals. And in that pool is England and Australia. Now, I think Australia are most likely, given that it's being played in England, are most likely the most vulnerable other than Wales. So everything they'll be doing will be targeting Australia. The issue for me also is, why did he get a contract through to 2019? Now, I can absolutely tell you that Steve Hansen, who coaches the All Blacks, only coach in the professional era last year to go through a whole season undefeated, has only got a contract until 2015. And and there is no way that a coach for the All Blacks is going to go more than 4 years. They just wouldn't do it. And there are plenty of other people lining up. I thought Gatland would one day coach New Zealand, but I don't think he will. No. A guy called Joe Schmidt across the water now is doing things pretty well. and I'm just disappointed. But you know what I think Gats needs if he's going to do well at this next World Cup? He needs to, Non, you could most likely be better than me talking about this. I think he needs a couple of new voices in that coaching setup, because I think the players are most likely getting to the stage now where they've heard it all, and they actually need to freshen it up. And now I'm not a coach, I could never be a coach, because well, that's why I took up refereeing, because I just couldn't be a coach. I just haven't got the temperament for it. But Non, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I agree. I'd only ever had Welsh coaches, and this season we won, well, four seasons we did really well and won the Championship and the Triple Crown, and we had a coach from South Africa. And it was just something different, and like you said, a new voice, different opinions. He made us, the biggest word was family, brought us all together. We had the camaraderie, and best 4 years of rugby I played for Wales.
Yeah.
Okay. Amanda, final word from the floor. Who would your favourite be? And we'll go out and get them tomorrow.
Well, it just comes down to the same issues we've been debating all day, I think. Do we want somebody homegrown that these kids can look up to? Or do you want someone with the best skill set for the job?
Okay. Teasing us without giving us a definite answer. Thank you very much.
Have we got no more time?
No, we've come to the end of time.
I think that's down to opinion, though. You know?
Yeah. You can get different answers by asking the same question to different people.
Could I just overrule you, being the, I know you're the chairman, and you've done a brilliant job, but could we just ask for one, because I'm conscious of the need that people, is there one more question out there that you would like to, sorry mate, one that you would like to ask anybody? Phil?
Yes.
Yes.
I think if you ask everyone here what is regional rugby, you'll get as many people here give individual answers. I think one of the things that you messed up with when you left was to never give a definitive answer of what it is. And that's why you've had Andrew Horse saying that the Ospreys want to do things, the WRU won't let them. Nobody knows, okay? If I want to know what the agreement is between the French Union and the French clubs, I can go to the French Union's website and download it. I can read it. If I want to see what it is with the English clubs and the RFU, I can go to the RFU's website, download most of it. We're told that Roger Lewis has presented the regions with a 297-page document for them to sign. Okay, so it goes back to the issue of detail and trying to get everyone on the same hymn sheet. So if you were to be successful, how transparent would you be?
Like I always am, very transparent. I'll answer any question, anytime, anywhere, and you know, I do spend a bit of time at the moment on Twitter and on Ballard and places like that, answering as many questions as I can, but I also go out to the clubs, and anybody's able to ask me any questions there as well.
I think we're in a digital age, so you need to get it online. That's my point.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Transparency, honesty and trust. Well, I mean, ask Hugh. He ran an organisation, and you had to have your stuff online, didn't you?
And why shouldn't you?
Yeah,
I do with my job. We're all of us probably. We're all accountable. I can't do anything without putting it into my computer. I could lose my job, so why shouldn't we all be accountable?
Yeah. Tom Peters, the management guru, once said, everybody should be involved in the strategic planning process. All thoughts and views should be collated and put together, and the day before the plan goes to the printers, it should be ceremoniously burnt. And that's what we should be aiming for, is how we get people's thoughts and views and that people got trust and confidence. At the moment, because there's such a lack of trust and confidence in things around, people are having to develop 295-page documents. And the next one will be, somebody will see a loophole and they'll add another addendum or whatever to try and close that loophole and whatever. And all that happens is it spirals downwards because people don't trust each other. When you've got a situation whereby people trust each other and people are clear about the principles under which they should work, that people are being open and honest with each other and saying, actually, David, I don't like how you handled this or whether you did this or whatever, and there's a debate and a discussion, then we can actually move forward. But until those days actually arrive, then there's always going to be suspicion around.
And that's a fantastic place to leave it. And I suggest you don't rush home and burn this and take Hugh's advice. You might even read it. But at the end of the day, it's in the hands of the clubs, it's in the hands of people like you in the audience. Thank you very much for your attendance, for your thought-provoking questions, and I'd ask you to thank our panel in the usual way: Paul Turner, Hugh Jones, Non Evans and David Moffat. Thank you very much.
Just before you go, I'd like you to thank Nigel Walker for being a fantastic. I reckon he's in trouble. Because if they're looking for a replacement for David Dimbleby, mate, this is the guy. Oh, can I?